A young black boy, only 7 years old, saw a car pulled over and walked up without fear, like fixing what others left behind was just part of his day. Inside the car sat a millionaire in a sharp suit, rushing through life, until time stopped. Because on that boy's wrist was a bracelet. Not just any bracelet, the bracelet. The one he gave to the only woman he never forgot. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because this is another heartfelt story from Rod Stories, where you feel the true emotion of stories that make you reflect on life. Ethan Cole had never been the type of man to accept delays, especially not the kind that came wrapped in heat, dust, and inconvenience. He ran a fast-growing software firm out of Atlanta and had just wrapped up a site inspection outside Charleston when his SUV jolted with a sudden lurch. The steering wheel pulled sharply to the right, and warning lights blinked to life across the dashboard. A flat tire, of course. He pulled over, jaw tight, and stepped out of the vehicle. As he opened the trunk, he muttered under his breath about unreliable maintenance and how no one had checked this before he left. Ethan hadn't changed a tire himself in over 10 years. That sort of thing was what assistance or roadside memberships were for. But today, on a back road with no signal and no one around, he was alone. His navy suit was already collecting dust, and he was trying to recall where the jack even went when a voice came from behind him. It was small, calm, and surprisingly unafraid. A young boy stood a few feet away, no older than 7 or 8. He had dark skin, close-cropped hair, and a steady gaze. His white t-shirt was a bit stained, his sneakers worn, but his posture was upright and matter-of-fact, like helping a stranger was just another part of his afternoon. Ethan instinctively started to dismiss him, already shaking his head when his eyes caught on something small and shining on the boy's wrist. A silver bracelet, thin, slightly tarnished. His breath caught in his throat. He'd seen that bracelet before. No, not just one like it. That exact bracelet. "Stay strong," it had read. He had it engraved for Jasmine Harris 6 years ago, on the night before he left for Atlanta. She had cried when he gave it to her. He had told her he'd be back. He hadn't come back. It hadn't even been a messy breakup. Just distance, silence, and time. And now this boy in the middle of nowhere was wearing it on his wrist like it belonged to him. He asked, his voice lower, the usual edge of authority dulled by disbelief. The boy followed Ethan's gaze and glanced down at his wrist. He held it up as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world. "My mom gave it to me," he said simply. "She said it was important." That sentence landed like a blow. Ethan's gaze traveled slowly back up to the boy's face. The resemblance was impossible to ignore now. The eyes, amber brown, a shade too bright to be mistaken, were his. The shape of the boy's chin, even the way his brow furrowed slightly in curiosity, mirrored his own expressions from childhood photos his mother still kept in frames back home. Ethan suddenly forgot about the flat tire, the calls he was missing, the meeting he'd have to reschedule. This boy wasn't just some helpful stranger. Something was wrong, or maybe right, but either way, it was far too personal to ignore now. Ethan hesitated before replying. "Ethan," he said. The name meant nothing to the boy, who simply nodded and crouched down next to the wheel, already inspecting the lug nuts like it was something he'd done a dozen times before. Ethan stood there, frozen, watching a kid he had just met, who might be his son, kneeling in the dust to help him change a tire like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You've done this before?" Ethan asked. Malik nodded without looking up. "Yeah. My mom's car breaks down sometimes. We can't always pay someone to fix it, so she taught me." There was no shame in his voice, no hesitation. Just the clear practicality of a life that Ethan had never imagined Jasmine living. Raising a child, maybe alone, teaching him how to be self-reliant before he was even out of elementary school. He hadn't checked his old voicemail in years. He had been too focused on growth, on deals, on everything except what he left behind. He had convinced himself she had moved on, that it was a clean break. But what if it wasn't? What if she had been carrying his child while he was too busy building a company to answer a call? Malik worked quietly, finishing up with an efficiency that spoke volumes. "You're good to go," he said, standing and wiping his hands on his jeans. Ethan reached for his wallet automatically, but Malik raised a hand. "I don't want money. I was just helping." That response, so simple, so clear, knocked the wind out of Ethan. He shoved the bill back in his pocket and asked, voice uneven, "Do you and your mom live around here?" Malik pointed up the road. "Yellow house, red porch, we fixed it up last year." In that small yellow house, Jasmine might be cooking dinner right now, completely unaware that her past was parked just down the road, staring at her son in disbelief. Ethan wasn't sure what scared him more, the possibility that she had known and didn't tell him, or the idea that she had tried and he hadn't been there to listen. He crouched again, not to help, but just to meet Malik at eye level. "Would it be okay if I stopped by to say thank you?" he asked, trying not to sound as desperate as he felt. Malik thought it over, tilting his head like a tiny adult. "I think she'd be cool with that. She talks about you sometimes." Ethan blinked. "She does?" Malik shrugged. "Only a little. She says you were smart, and really bad at calling people back." Ethan let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but not quite. "That sounds about right." Malik smiled faintly. "She says we don't need much, but I think she misses somebody. Maybe you." Malik turned and jogged toward the house, his small frame disappearing down the road. Ethan stayed beside his SUV, eyes still fixed on the fading glimpse of the boy with his bracelet. His eyes. Nothing in his meticulously planned life had prepared him for this moment. A flat tire, a silver bracelet, and a 7-year-old with his face had just opened a door he thought was sealed forever. Ethan had come to Charleston for business. He had found something else entirely. And as he stood in the dust beside his car, Ethan Cole knew one thing for sure. Whatever his plans had been, they didn't matter anymore. He had just met Malik, and those amber-brown eyes told him nothing in his world would ever be the same. Ethan hadn't moved for a full minute after Malik jogged away. His legs felt like they were made of stone, as if stepping forward might somehow make this more real than he was ready for. But the moment he saw the boy wearing that bracelet, with those unmistakable eyes, something cracked open. He couldn't just walk away. When he finally started moving, every step toward the house at the end of the road brought more memories than he wanted. He remembered Jasmine laughing in his apartment back in Atlanta, barefoot, hair in a messy bun, telling him not to forget to eat during long meetings. He remembered the way she held on to him the night he left for the city. He had promised her it was temporary, just until the business got off the ground. But then the business grew. The silence grew with it. Now he was standing at the foot of a small house with chipped paint and a bold red porch, unsure if he had any right to be there. He took a breath, raised his hand, and knocked on the door. It opened faster than he expected, but her eyes, those eyes he used to love, were different now. Guarded, worn. They had seen more than they should have without him. She looked at him like someone scanning for proof, someone who wanted to believe what she was seeing but didn't dare to just yet. "Ethan," she said, voice neutral. No surprise, no welcome, just his name. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. How do you explain years of silence in a single breath? How do you apologize to someone who waited and got nothing back? He tried anyway. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I swear, Jasmine, I didn't know." She didn't flinch. "Didn't know what? That you have a son, that I raised him alone, that he's smart and kind and fixes strangers' tires on the side of the road?" Her voice never rose, but each word cut deeper. I figured I missed my chance." She gave a quiet laugh, sharp and dry. "You didn't miss it, Ethan. You erased it. You disappeared. I called your office when I found out I was pregnant. I left messages. I sent a letter to your apartment. One of your assistants called back once and said you were traveling. After that, nothing." Her arms crossed over her chest like she was holding herself together. "I stopped waiting for a call that wasn't coming." Ethan winced. The guilt felt physical, wrapping around his ribs like a vice. "I was building something. I told myself I had to stay focused, that once it was stable, I'd reach out." He heard how pathetic it sounded even as he said it. Jasmine shook her head. "You don't get to rewrite the timeline. I wasn't looking for a rich man, Ethan. I just wanted you to be there. You were already a ghost before Malik was even born." He looked down, unable to hold her gaze. "I didn't make space for the life I already had." Jasmine's arms were still crossed, but her shoulders dropped slightly, as if the weight of this conversation was finally sinking in. "Well, now you know," she said, "and you have to decide what that means." for him. Because he's not a one-time obligation. He's not some project you check in on between meetings. Ethan's jaw tightened. I'm not here out of guilt, he said. And I'm not running from this. I saw him, Jasmine. I talked to him. He looked at me like I was just another guy with car trouble. But I looked at him, and I saw myself. Jasmine's expression flickered for a moment. Surprise, maybe. Or pain. But she didn't let it linger. She turned slightly as if to end the conversation. You should go. He doesn't even know who you are, and I'm not ready to explain it all right now. He nodded slowly, but didn't turn away. I'll come back, he said. I just wanted to say thank you for what you've done, for raising him. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but I'd like to earn a place in his life if there's any way you'll let me. Jasmine stood still, her eyes heavy. We'll see, she said finally, voice low. He's not a decision I make alone. He's his own person. You'll have to show him who you are now because I'm not going to build that image for you. For the first time, she stepped aside, just enough to signal the door was still open, but not wide. Just a crack. Ethan understood the message. No promises, no guarantees, but not rejection either. He nodded, stepped back onto the porch, and made his way down the steps. The door closed gently behind him. He didn't feel closure, but he felt clarity. Jasmine had spoken the truth he needed to hear. The calls he hadn't taken. The boy who had looked him in the eye without knowing what they meant to each other. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was an awakening. Jasmine had opened the door long enough to show him what he missed, what he could still have, if he was willing to work for it. The house behind him faded into the quiet of the street, but the weight of the conversation stayed sharp and clear in his chest. He now knew the truth. He had a son, and he had never given himself the chance to know him. Ethan didn't show up on the doorstep the next day with flowers or apologies. He showed up with a backpack, a late pass from the office, and 2 granola bars in his pocket because he remembered Malik liked snacks on the ride home. Jasmine didn't smile when she saw him standing at the door, but she didn't close it either. She simply said, "School gets out at 2:45, don't be late," and walked back inside. That was his cue. No drama, no guarantees. Just a door left open a crack, again. Ethan had spent years running a business where decisions had to be made in seconds, where results were everything, and patience was a luxury. But this required something else. He didn't know what to call it yet. The first time he picked Malik up from school, the boy walked out carrying a crooked cardboard solar system, and talking about Jupiter being the biggest, but not the hottest. Ethan didn't understand half of it, but he nodded along. He drove slowly, careful not to interrupt the rhythm of a kid who had already lived 7 years without him. Every word felt like a thread trying to stitch something back together, or at least pretending to. Malik did most of the work. Ethan just sat beside him, trying not to mess up the steps and overthinking every sentence. Jasmine stayed nearby, sometimes cooking, sometimes pretending not to listen, but her silence was no longer icy. It was observational. Ethan realized something strange as the days passed. For the first time in years, he wasn't performing. He wasn't closing a deal or proving his worth. He was just there, present. And that terrified him more than any board meeting ever had. He didn't know the bedtime story routine, didn't know how to brush through Malik's curls without tugging, didn't know how to fold those tiny cartoon-covered pajamas without making them look wrinkled. But he was trying. And slowly, Malik seemed to notice. One night, after Ethan clumsily read the wrong ending to a story, Malik corrected him and laughed until his stomach hurt. That laugh echoed in Ethan's mind all the way home. One evening, after Malik had gone to bed, she sat across from Ethan on the porch and said, "Let's be clear. This isn't a weekend visit. It's either commitment or nothing." She didn't say it with anger, just certainty. Ethan nodded, understanding more than he let on. He hadn't come back to pass time. He had come back because something in him had shifted the moment he saw that bracelet. But he also knew showing up a few times didn't erase years of absence. "I'm here for the long run," he told her, "even if I'm not perfect." Jasmine studied him like she was still deciding if she believed that. "You won't get a trophy for doing the bare minimum," she added. "This isn't about you. It's about him." Ethan didn't argue. He knew she was right. He also knew this wasn't a sprint. It was something much slower and far more fragile. So he kept showing up, early to school, lost in art projects, helping with take-home science kits that made no sense to him, but meant everything to Malik. He shifted calls, postponed meetings. His assistant stopped asking questions when he blocked out 2:30 to 6 every weekday. He began waking up thinking about what Malik might need that day, instead of what investors expected from him. He learned how Malik liked his toast cut, into triangles, not squares. He figured out which cartoons annoyed him, and which ones made him laugh uncontrollably. He started keeping notes on his phone, not for pitch decks, but for Malik's favorite colors and how he pronounced triceratops. Every time Malik shared some small fact about the planets or how glue sticks were banned in his class because of an incident, Ethan felt himself become less of a stranger. The distance between them wasn't erased, but it was shrinking. And sometimes Malik would look up at him in the middle of something completely ordinary and say, "You're weird," and smile. And Ethan felt like maybe that was the best compliment he'd ever earned. She noticed how Malik reached for Ethan's hand without thinking when they crossed the street. She saw how Ethan paused before correcting him, letting him figure things out. She noticed how Ethan never asked for credit or praise. One night Malik asked if Ethan would be there the next day, and Ethan said yes without hesitation. Jasmine didn't say anything then, but she stayed standing by the hallway, watching Ethan tuck Malik in. She'd told herself not to hope. Not again. But Malik was changing too. He was brighter, more open. There was less space in his voice when he talked about Ethan, less caution in his drawings when he added 3 figures instead of 2. Jasmine wasn't ready to call it trust, but it was movement. And for now, that was enough. By the end of the 3rd week, Ethan sat beside Malik on the floor, surrounded by markers, glue, and cut-up pieces of cardboard that were supposedly becoming a space station. Malik was giving orders like a little general, and Ethan was following them without question. Jasmine leaned in the doorway with her arms crossed, watching the two of them. The man who once vanished had started showing up for real, not with money, not with promises, but with time, with mistakes, with presence. He hadn't said anything poetic or grand, but he was here, not just reconnecting with Malik. He was rediscovering parts of himself he hadn't realized were missing. And as Malik laughed at something he'd glued upside down, Ethan laughed with him, not because it was funny, but because it felt like the beginning of something worth building. The rocket ship wasn't perfect. It leaned slightly to the left, half of the painted flames were smudged, and the nose cone was being held together with more glue than actual structure. But Malik was proud of it. And for Ethan, it might as well have been the crown jewel of his entire adult life. They'd spent the better part of the afternoon on Jasmine's backyard patio, surrounded by torn cardboard boxes, colored markers, safety scissors, and Malik's relentless imagination. Ethan had built tech startups from nothing. He'd pitched to investors who could smell weakness in under a minute, but none of it had ever felt as demanding or rewarding as being told by a 7-year-old to hold the wings like this or the whole thing crashes. Malik was in charge the whole time, directing with sharp focus and bursts of laughter. For Ethan, following orders from his own son was its own kind of quiet healing. He wasn't correcting. He was learning. By the time the last star sticker was pressed onto the ship's body, Malik stood back, hands on hips, and nodded like a commander satisfied with a mission accomplished. Ethan started to help clean up the scraps when Malik suddenly turned and dug into his jeans pocket. "I made something else," he said, pulling out a loosely tied string bracelet. It was made of thick yarn and a few plastic beads, blue, green, and gold. Malik held it out like he was offering something priceless. "It's a good luck charm," he explained. "I made it at school. I was going to give it to Mom, but I think you need it more." Ethan stared at it, silent. It wasn't about the bracelet. It was what it meant. That Malik had thought about him, chosen him, trusted him even just a little. Ethan reached out carefully as though afraid he might break it. "Thank you," he said softly, the words catching on something tight in his throat. "I'll take good care of it." Malik grinned, then returned to sorting through their leftover supplies, already onto the next idea. But Ethan couldn't stop staring at the bracelet in his hand. In his world, success was measured in contracts and milestones. But here, in this backyard, it was a beaded string handed to him by a boy who was slowly letting him in. Ethan sat on the porch beside Jasmine, both of them holding mugs of tea more for habit than for warmth. They didn't talk for a few minutes, just sat in the kind of silence that had weight to it. Not uncomfortable, not empty, but cautious. Jasmine broke it first. "He asks questions at night," she said, her voice low. "Not every night, but often enough." Ethan turned to look at her, giving her space to continue. "He asks if you'll still be here tomorrow. If it's okay to believe you will be." The honesty hit him like a slow wave. It wasn't said with blame, but with truth. And it mattered more than any of the business truths he used to live by. "I don't blame him," Ethan said. "And I don't blame you. I wasn't there. And he doesn't have a reason to think I will be now." Jasmine looked down at her tea, then back up. "But he wants to believe. That's the part that scares me. But I can promise one thing, I'm not leaving. I'm here now, and I'll keep being here." It wasn't a declaration. It was a vow built from failure and hope. Jasmine didn't reply right away. She sipped her tea again, slower this time. "You're not trying to be the hero," she said, more to herself than to him. "You're just showing up." Ethan nodded. That was the point. No grand gestures, just being where he said he'd be. Jasmine's eyes softened a little, but her posture stayed firm. She wasn't offering forgiveness. Not yet, but she was offering something else, something that mattered more. Time. Ethan felt it in her presence, in her willingness to speak this plainly. They weren't rewriting the past. They were cautiously, maybe even unconsciously, beginning to write something new. Jasmine rested the side of her head against the porch post, still watching him. "You know, when you left, I told myself I'd never make excuses for you. I wouldn't cover for the silence. I'd just tell him what I knew, that you were gone." Her voice cracked slightly but never broke. "But now, he's starting to see you as part of his world. That matters." Ethan didn't respond with a speech. He didn't say thank you or ask for more. He just nodded, feeling the weight of what she had trusted him enough to say. They sat together like that for a while longer, both of them staring into the darkness, listening not to what was said but to what had changed in the space between them. Ethan slipped the string bracelet onto his wrist, the beads resting lightly against his skin. It didn't match anything he wore, but it fit in a way that nothing else he owned ever had. But he had earned this night, this silence, this seat beside the woman he had once left behind and the son he had just begun to know. Jasmine didn't say anything else, and neither did he. But that small gesture from earlier, the handmade bracelet, the unspoken acceptance in Malik's grin, meant more than words ever could. Ethan didn't need more than that. Tonight, he had been given something real, and he had promised one thing in return: presence. Ethan's calendar used to be untouchable. Mornings were for investor calls, afternoons for client reviews, and evenings were swallowed by emails, deadlines, and plans stacked 3 weeks deep. But now, the most important recurring event on his phone was a non-negotiable 2:45 p.m. School pickup labeled Malik. At first, he thought rescheduling his entire professional life would feel like sacrifice. It didn't. What surprised him wasn't how much he had to shift. It was how little he missed the things he once thought essential. The morning meeting still happened, just earlier. The urgent calls could wait until Malik was home and settled with a snack. His assistant learned quickly not to suggest anything that conflicted with Malik's science fair or art showcase. Ethan was no longer chasing the future at full speed. He was present, and presence changed everything. Or how he needed exactly 3 deep breaths before giving a school presentation, or he'd stutter, or that he had memorized the names of all the planets and had firm opinions about which ones were the coolest. Jupiter, obviously, because of the great red spot, but Neptune had vibes. Ethan started saving every drawing, every fact, every little quirk like it was treasure, because for him it was. Malik didn't open up in grand gestures. He did it in little moments, sliding a drawing across the table, pointing out constellations through the car window, asking Ethan to check his spelling without calling it help. And slowly, Ethan began to see just how much he'd almost missed. Jasmine watched all of this from a distance, not because she didn't care, but because she had learned caution. At first, she didn't say much. She let Ethan come and go, waiting to see if the rhythm would break. But it didn't. He kept showing up, on the porch after work, in the kitchen learning how to pack lunchboxes, at the grocery store, asking which brand of juice Malik liked best. He was awkward sometimes, slow to adjust, but he never stopped trying. And Jasmine, who had long ago trained herself to expect disappointment, started noticing that she wasn't holding her breath anymore. She wasn't bracing for the letdown. She had begun, quietly, reluctantly, to hope. Not for romance, not for a reset, but for consistency, for presence, for Malik to have someone he could count on without question. Ethan crouched down so they were eye level. Of course. Malik hesitated. Are you gonna stay forever? The question didn't come with tears or fear. It came with curiosity, but Ethan felt the weight of it all the same. He looked Malik in the eyes and answered, If you and your mom want me to, then yes. I want to stay forever. Malik nodded slowly, absorbing the answer like a scientist cataloging new information. Then without another word, he ran to his room and came back with a crumpled piece of construction paper. It was a drawing. 3 stick figures under a blue sky. One labeled me, one mom, and one Ethan. At the top, in big crooked letters, it read, My family. Ethan didn't cry. Not because he didn't feel like it, but because the moment deserved more than tears. It deserved respect. He took the drawing like it was something sacred. Can I keep this? He asked. Malik shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. Yeah, I can make more. But to Ethan, there wouldn't be another one quite like this. He placed the drawing gently on the fridge, smoothing the edges flat like he was laying bricks in something permanent. Jasmine had watched the entire exchange from the hallway. She didn't say anything, but Ethan caught the look in her eyes, less guarded, less distant, like something had shifted between all of them. They weren't just living in the same orbit. They were slowly, carefully forming gravity. Later that evening, after Malik had gone to bed and the house was quiet again, Ethan found himself lingering at the kitchen sink. Jasmine came in behind him, drying her hands with a dish towel, and leaned against the counter. She didn't ask for an explanation. She didn't question what he meant by forever. She had heard it all, seen it. And for once, she didn't look like she was waiting for him to slip up. Instead, she just said, That drawing meant something. Ethan turned toward her. It meant everything. There was a long pause between them. Not silence, just space. The kind of space that's earned over time. And Jasmine gave him the smallest nod, one that didn't guarantee anything but acknowledge the possibility. The chance. Ethan didn't push for more. He didn't ask for forgiveness or make any grand claims. He just accepted the moment for what it was. A sign that he was learning to stay. Not because he had to, but because he finally wanted to. Ethan wasn't a morning person, and Jasmine's stove took forever to heat evenly. But somehow he was standing there at 8:30 on a Sunday flipping pancakes in a pan that clearly had a grudge against him. He'd already burned the first 2 and accidentally cracked an egg onto the counter. But Malik, sitting at the table with his crayons and paper rockets, seemed completely unfazed. Every time Ethan apologized for another pancake that looked more like a science experiment than breakfast, Malik would glance up from his latest drawing and say, It's fine. That one just looks more crispy. Then he'd go back to scribbling flames under a spaceship labeled Explorer 2. Jasmine occasionally peeked in but didn't interfere. She just poured coffee and let it all happen. When Ethan finally placed a slightly uneven stack of pancakes in front of Malik, expecting at best a polite thank you, the boy took a bite, grinned, and declared, These are the best pancakes I've ever had. Ethan didn't need a Michelin star. That sentence was more than enough. They didn't have plans for the day, and that was the plan. After breakfast, the 3 of them decided to walk to the park, just a few blocks down, no real destination in mind. Malik rode ahead on his bike, announcing imaginary missions to avoid sidewalk cracks and defeat invisible enemies with names like Captain Dust and Mr. Loud Shoes. Ethan and Jasmine walked behind him, sometimes talking, sometimes not. The space between them no longer filled with caution or silence, but ease. It wasn't perfect. They weren't trying to recapture the past or make up for lost years in a single weekend, but it was something real, something new. At the park, Ethan pushed Malik on the swings, counting every launch like a rocket countdown while Jasmine sat on the bench, smiling to herself when Malik insisted he was defying gravity. Ethan didn't think about work, or time, or failure. He was too busy learning how to just be a dad, to be part of a life he had once abandoned, but was now slowly being invited back into. That gave Ethan and Jasmine a moment alone in the kitchen. She opened a drawer, pulled out an envelope, and handed it to him without saying much. Inside was a photo, a baby wrapped in a soft blanket, staring up at the camera with wide, familiar eyes. Ethan stared at it like it might vanish if he blinked too fast. He traced the edges of the picture with his thumb, overwhelmed by the fact that he had never seen this version of his son before. "I was going to send it to you," Jasmine said quietly, "but I didn't." Her voice wasn't angry. It was honest. Ethan looked up at her, and the weight of what he'd missed pressed against his chest. "You weren't ready then," she continued, "but maybe you are now." The sentence didn't come with forgiveness. It came with permission to start again, if he could keep showing up. Ethan nodded slowly, unable to find words that could do justice to what he was feeling. She just moved around the kitchen, picking up dishes from breakfast, wiping the counter, occasionally glancing toward Malik's room to check on the scribbled noise of new ideas being born on construction paper. Ethan offered to help, and this time she didn't say no. They cleaned together in rhythm, not speaking much but working side by side like it was something they'd always done. There was no discussion about what would come next, no awkward attempts to define the relationship, just quiet tasks, shared space, and the simple weight of mutual understanding. That's what they were building now. Not a clean slate, but a steady one. And Ethan knew it wasn't about earning Jasmine's trust in one grand act. It was about reinforcing it every day, with presence and patience. When the sun began to dip low and the house grew quiet again, Ethan stood by the front door, keys in his hand. Jasmine walked him out like she always did, but tonight felt different. She didn't lean against the frame with her arms crossed. She didn't say anything about what time he should come back, or whether Malik had asked about tomorrow. She just stood beside him, the space between them calm and full. Ethan turned to say goodbye, not knowing if there was more to offer. But before he could speak, Jasmine reached for his hand. No speech, no declarations, just her fingers closing gently around his like a thread being tied. Not to the past, but to the future they were slowly starting to trust. Ethan looked down at their hands and back at her, and for once, he didn't feel the need to say anything at all. And so on that quiet Sunday evening, after a morning of lopsided pancakes and rocket ship drawings, after a walk to the park and a photo that changed everything, Ethan left Jasmine's house with something he hadn't had in years. Not certainty, not perfection, but clarity. He wasn't walking away. Not this time, because what they had wasn't flawless and it wasn't finished, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like, subscribe to Rod Stories, and drop a comment telling us what you thought. And hey, share this video with someone who'd love a story like this. Real emotions, real reflections. That's what we do here at Rod Stories.